Hi, everyone. Sean Paul Ellis here from the Saturday Morning Cartoons Podcast. Remember, that's morning with a U. Some quick pre-show announcements regarding what's actually happening next month in November, some shout-outs, and then what are we actually talking about on today's episode. So this is our last episode for October for Spooky Cartoons. Next month, we're going to be watching and reviewing some of my favorite shows with Netflix November. We're going to be getting into BoJack Horseman as well as also Big Mouth. We might even have a couple surprises on an episode that is coming up in the future, so stay tuned. Some shout outs. Everybody, we have achieved our 2018 campaign to get Bobby Anthem animated. Our listener and friend Brian has drawn Bobby in a Bob's Burger style, and we will be posting it tomorrow. That's Tuesday. We'll be posting it tomorrow. It's awesome. Can't wait for you guys to see it. If you want to help us continue to get Bobby Anthem animated in another style or anything at all, any Bobby fan art that you want at all, message us like Brian did for a shout out and some free stickers. Since Brian has been such a wonderful human, go check him out on Twitch and subscribe. Brian is under the tag Typhair. That is Typhenstein. It's in our show notes as well. Subscribe to his channel now, please. He's been so incredibly awesome with all of this art. He is now Twitch affiliated, and he's pushing towards getting partnered. Show him some love. I mean, I love video games. I hope you love video games. So just check him out. Brian's the best. Appreciate it, Brian. Thank you, man. Also, from last week's episode, have you guys picked up Rory Lucey's book? It's titled Jonesy, 9 Lives on the Nostromo. You can get it now on Amazon. Make sure that you check it out. Last week, we had an opportunity to interview him. Go support a friend of the show, please. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about Teen Wolf. Yeah, you remember the movie? Well, they made an animated version of Teen Wolf, and it changes the canon from the movie a lot. I'm joined by friends and performers Nina Shu, who did not watch a lot of cartoons as a kid, and she'll explain more why, and Chris Ulrich, who helped us answer the question, is it WereWolf or WereWUF? So are you guys, as you're listening, are you Team WereWolf or Team WereWUF? All of that and more on today's episode. So now, on with the show. Hello, and welcome to Saturday Morning Cartoons, the podcast that revisits, reviews, and ridicules some of the world's weirdest animated series, coming to you all the way from Wolverton. I'll be your host, Sean Paul Ellis. Joining me today, someone who is ready for a howling good time, we have DC-based performer Nina Shu joining us. Welcome, Nina.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, because this is your first time on the show.
Correct.
Speaking of first times as well, joining us today with some pointy ears, menacing teeth, and a lot of body hair, we have body language expert and DC-based performer Chris Ulrich joining the show for the first time. Welcome, Chris.
No, sorry. Welcome me. Thank you, John. I'm honored to be here. I went deep. I was in Wolverton for a second. I'm back. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you, guys. We've had obviously a lot of very strange wolf-related puns and jokes. They're probably not going to get any better from this point forward, especially when we discuss some of the dialogue from this show as well. But we are, of course, if you're not familiar, talking with the animated series Teen Wolf. As all of our discussions, I want to open this up because there's a lot kind of involved in Teen Wolf, and so Nina, I want to ask, what's your relationship with Teen Wolf? What did you know about this cartoon? Did you know about the movies? What is Teen Wolf's special place in your heart?
It did not have one until I was invited to watch an episode and come talk about it. However, in earlier discussions just before we started, I did have one reference to Teen Wolf, which is that maybe this shows my age. I was watching the show Jane the Virgin. And the show Jane the Virgin recently had an episode arc that featured Adam, and I can't remember his last name, but he was the main character of the remake of Teen Wolf, which, Sean, you told me has been on MTV.
Correct.
But as far as like the original movie or the thing with Michael J. Fox or Jason Bateman, totally no knowledge at all.
Totally no knowledge at all. Wow. Yeah, we were kind of talking about the fact that like there have been so many iterations of Teen Wolf, from the original movie with Michael J. Fox to Teen Wolf 2 with Jason Bateman, and then we had the animated series kind of like thrown into the mix, and then 20 years into the future, somebody was like, we want a sexier Teen Wolf. Like, we want to remove all the magic. We want to remove all the vampires that we had in the franchise Twilight, and we just want the brooding machismo of dudes with lycanthropy just hulking out and like howling at the moon and at each other. Man, MTV was like, yeah, greenlit, done. We're gonna make 4 seasons of this.
What do you do? I'm on the show on MTV about werewolves doing the deed.
Oh, Chris. Well, Chris, this brings up a great question for you then. What was your relationship with Teen Wolf? Where does this land for you?
The cartoon I didn't even know there was a cartoon. So you brought it up. I'm a Camp Nina on that. And but for some reason I feel like, was there ever a movie before Michael J. Fox did it?
I mean, there've been a lot of werewolf movies.
No, that was like focused on this whole theme. So
about like adolescence, like lycanthropy and werewolfism as a way to describe adolescence.
No, well, was the Fox movie a remake of an earlier version of this?
You mean the original Teen Wolf?
Yeah.
I actually don't know.
So, because I could have sworn that when I remembered elements of it, because when I went back and watched clips of Michael J. Fox doing it, I didn't remember that as much, but I remembered an earlier version in my head. It could have just been one of my hallucinations, but when going back and watching Michael J. Fox, for me, like, it was his ties to family ties. So if that's what I was, and I saw elements of Teen Wolf, if I watched it was him, which it may very well have been. I loved that. And so when I went back and watched this, it was my first time. I'm like, I had no idea there was a cartoon called Teen Wolf.
No. I mean, we are 3 for 3. I had no idea that this cartoon existed either. I was intimately familiar, and I love the first 2 Teen Wolf movies. They are super fun. We'll kind of talk a little bit about some of the challenges in adapting it into a cartoon, because they change a lot of the things that they set up in the first movie. And so I think in the progression that we had for this, we have Teen Wolf with Michael J. Fox, Teen Wolf the animated series, Teen Wolf 2 with Jason Bateman, and then, I think in 2011 is when they started the MTV Teen Wolf series. So,
and was this because Michael J. Fox didn't want to come back for the sequel?
I don't actually know. I don't really know what the story is behind him saying, like, I don't want to do Teen Wolf 2.
Yeah, I was curious.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because in anticipation for tonight, I have watched a lot of clips and almost the entirety of the original Michael J. Fox Teen Wolf. And so we can kind of talk about, again, some of the differences that the cartoon has from the actual cartoon, which is kind of interesting because they really kind of rewrite some of the structure of the movie to maybe make it, I guess, and there's a big question mark behind this, relevant for kids, which
right
seems kind of weird. But I mean, again, then like Teen Wolf, the whole idea behind it was that you're a kid and you're in like middle school, like he's in high school at that point, and you're going through like weird changes, and your body's going through weird changes. So it's a great vehicle to explain puberty. But then they just kind of, go off the rails and like, well, he's a wolf. And then everybody in that town is like, we're cool with this.
Was this Teen Wolf like the book version of, those books, Why do I poop? Everyone poops. Ever see those books?
Yeah.
So this Teen Wolf.
Why am I a werewolf?
Why am I a werewolf?
Right.
Yeah. Well, Why am I changing to the kids? It
Everybody
was like,
changes.
Teen Wolf was the original Why am I changing book.
Yeah. I mean, it very well could have been. I mean, that makes total sense to me.
Boom. Drop the mic. We're done.
Also, as a quick question, because Nina and I have already discussed this, but Chris, are you a werewolf? We've been both very, very concerned about you.
Yes.
No. I mean, I'm Italian, so it's that. It's like being a werewolf. Only hair grows everywhere you don't want it to grow.
Oh man, perfect. Not weird or explicit at all. We are like already at the point where we have ventured into sort of the sexy realm of this show, where this is like very clearly Saturday morning cartoons after dark. With Chris's Exactly.
Wow.
With Chris's simple statement, we've already landed square within that territory. If you are not familiar with Teen Wolf, let me break it down. Teen Wolf, known as The Cartoon Adventures of Teen Wolf in the UK, is an animated American television series broadcast from 1986 to 1987 that was produced by Southern Star Productions and Hanna-Barbera Australia in association with Clubhouse Pictures in the first season and Atlantic Kushner Lock in the second season, and it is based on the 1985 live-action film Teen Wolf. Now, the show went for 2 seasons and a total of 21 episodes between September 13th of 1986 and November 7th of 1987. Teen Wolf is if you're not familiar with the movie itself, it came out in 1985 and it is an American fantasy comedy film directed by Rob Daniels and written by Jeff Loeb and Matthew Wiseman. The film stars Michael J. Fox as an American high school student who discovers that his family has an unusual pedigree when he finds out that he is turning into a werewolf. We keep talking about Teen Wolf, the movie, in reference to this cartoon, obviously because the link that they have with the cartoon being so heavily based on it. It's just very weird to see that, if you're not familiar with the movie, there's this like very iconic scene where they're all playing basketball, like in the gym. There's a bunch of like teenagers that are in there, obviously 2 different sides of this basketball team. Somebody passes the ball to Michael J. Fox, like he gets like a breakaway, or he gets a rebound or something like that, falls on the ground. Everybody tries to like crowd on top of him to get the ball. And like, that's the moment where he sort of werewolfs out and like jumps up out of this like mass of people. And he is just like covered in hair. And so everybody in the room recognizes at that point that like something weird has happened. Everybody starts kind of like backing away from him. It gets really like kind of like needle drop quiet in this gymnasium. And it's Michael J. Fox just like in full werewolf, and he's just bouncing a basketball. He's like, I'm going to still play. And people are like on board with it then at that point. They're just like clapping and cheering for him. In that moment, all of a sudden that change gives him like this notoriety and sort of fame at this high school level, which is very interesting from sort of what we're going to learn a little bit about the plot and the synopsis for the cartoon as we begin to kind of talk about some of these differences. And to help us out, Nina is going to give us the plot.
Teen Wolf in the cartoon, the series is about a teenage boy and his family who can transform into werewolves, focusing on themes of coming of age and fitting in. While generally keeping true to the main ideas, this version made some changes from the film. Scott Howard and his family live in the fictional town of Wolverton, a small town that draws tourists because of its history of werewolf sightings. Unlike the film, Scott's status as a werewolf is a secret. Despite the youth audience, the cartoon series delivered very powerful critiques of disability as civil rights. Freely invoking an asthma attack or seizure, the series centered on how Scott felt weird immediately before and during his werewolf transformation. And although he never hurt anybody while he was a werewolf, Scott was conscious of his difference from other teenagers and had to make accommodations for himself. He also expressed frustration that the residents of this town had stereotyped his people. A jock named Mick constantly picks on Scott for being the outsider at Wolverton High.
Very interesting. Just to kind of see sort of the hidden nature. I remember, and maybe it was for one of those like television movies when whenever they would get ready and do like a Friday night movie with Teen Wolf. And I remember the tagline being like, Teen Wolf, the original party animal. Because he's like at a party, like kissing girls, drinking beer, having fun, on top of vehicles, howling at the moon. He's having a great time, And so this is like kind of like if you're familiar with the movie, this is like a huge shock because all of a sudden it's like we are obscuring and hiding the fact that he is a werewolf.
Yeah. It's kind of like going undercover almost. No, let me rephrase. Undercover in the sense that it's like the total opposite. You know what?
So not going undercover.
No. Well, no, I had a moment where were you done talking and I just jumped in. Was I not supposed to jump in?
No, please.
Oh, okay, got it. No. When I mean undercover, it's like no one can talk about him as werewolf. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like a hidden thing.
Right.
So it's a total shift.
So you bring up probably one of the questions that I wanted to get to during our plot discussion, Chris, but I think I can pose it right now because it's very quick. And I already know your answer for it too. So you don't even have to respond. Werewolf or werewolf?
Werewolf.
Yeah, werewolf.
What did I say? Werewolf.
You've been saying werewolf.
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 What is it? Werewolf?
It's werewolf.
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 Yeah, you've been saying werewolf.
Werewolf.
Yeah. It's been a joy to listen to it because I know that you're not aware of the fact that you're doing it.
Like most of my life.
Oh, perfect.
It makes me wonder though, like what the creative decision was. You know what? If we're gonna do an animated series, here's the twist.
Yeah. And this is always what I guess for me is kind of hard to kind of break down and unpack, is that we have this movie with Michael J. Fox, who was a rising star at that point, that kind of really kind of addresses the idea of being an outsider and feeling like your family is different and that it's weird, and sort of the whole idea of puberty and changing. And so it does a great job of kind of addressing that and talking about it. And then this cartoon is like, we're just going to keep everything secret. We're going to keep everything under wraps. But this is a cartoon that like kids may have watched when they were in middle school, about somebody who's like in high school, who's also like wearing a Letterman's jacket all the time. Seems like he has like a steady group of friends who seem to be pretty nice to him, except for this one jock, Mick, who seems to be a real total jackass. But at the same time, like he's coping, he's understanding some things about everything that's going on. Like it doesn't make sense for me, the idea of like they created a reality in a movie and then they completely negate it in the cartoon to move forward.
Right.
And I wonder whose benefit is that for? Who were they like, you know what? Kids are really going to love the idea of us changing and fucking up this entire town.
No, yeah, fully agree.
I keep thinking about it, and when you brought up this person who did that, I wonder if it was like the flip of that. It's like, well, that's not how life works. You just don't share stuff and people embrace you. The reality is you share stuff and people tear you apart. So why don't we make it a secret? Because if you make it a secret, then they've got to carry that burden with them. And then that's more like reality. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think if you're playing devil's advocate with me, I think that's a great defense for making that choice.
Sure, yeah.
I also just think it's really hard because like with the movie sort of setting the trend of these things are accessible, they had a lot of fun with being able to do that in the live action. And I kind of wonder sometimes if they were like, well, we can't have like a wolf cartoon character kissing real human girls,
right,
and like drinking beer at a party and stuff like that, and like
going
bowling and having like a killer time. Right. we have to put some restraint on this werewolf teenager. It makes me think like I wish that I would have been a fly in the room when they were making that. In that creative process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's 1980s, right? So think about the era of that time, where like in the post-Vietnam, everything's much more open, get stuff out there, be transparent. In the 1980s, it's like a reverse, much more conservative, much more, as America swings on the pendulum. So I wonder sometimes if those were influences that affected the writing room.
But I mean, I think I take your point too, but it's also the case that like the movie came out in 85, the series came out in 86.
Right.
Right. So like what happened
in
a year to go from, yes, let's, celebrate and acknowledge and honor this person's, status versus like, no, it must be a secret and he must carry this burden. Right. And this is what people will relate to on Saturday mornings.
That's right. Because nothing says live your life in secrecy and know that you carry something, a burden so great.
Right.
Especially being a werewolf in general. And werewolf.
A werewolf.
A werewolf. Okay. Yeah, I know. This is going to be a blast to hear you do this because every time you say it, I'm just going to kind of lean in and look at you. Well,
I see WW.
We want to start the discussion on Teen Wolf, and we would start this off how we do every episode, is that we want to talk about the theme song. We kind of want to discuss and really kind of get into some of the nuances about this, because there is a lot that is going on in this theme song. And to start us off, Nina is going to take us through her impressions.
Sure. So there's a lot going on. And I think maybe what struck me the most about the theme song is there's like a combination of different styles of animation. There's both a song happening as well as lines of dialogue that come in as well. And then I think there are parts of the theme song animation that then appeared in the episode itself.
Correct.
So all of that, I was very confused.
And we have been defining a lot of theme songs for cartoons as whether they have dedicated animation, whether they have recycled animation from an actual episode itself, or if they, a lot of times they'll do both. And that's sort of a hybrid approach, where a lot of times we've had people say, like, I love the fact that there was something in the theme song that I saw, but then I also saw it in the episode. And so if I was paying attention to the theme song, nice little callback, kind of an Easter egg for me to just kind of point to and say, oh, they did that during the thing. I get it. Other times it can be really distracting and kind of take you out of the situation or out of the experience itself. Then every once in a while you have one that's just like dedicated animation where like you're not going to see any of that animation in the actual show. And in some cases the quality and tone is much, much different from what you actually see in the episode proper. And so this, to your point, this is probably one of the more unusual hybrids that we've ever seen because, again, as you had mentioned, spoken lines of dialogue that are actually from the episode. That was bizarre to...
It made me wonder, too, because that was what we saw was the pilot episode.
Correct.
So if in other episodes it would repeat those lines from the pilot or if it would be
Changed every time?
like change every time for like whatever episode it was.
That's a good point.
I don't know.
I don't know. I'd have to watch a couple more episodes to see if that's the case. I'd be curious to see. I'm going to venture to say that because of money and time and cost savings that they probably don't.
Probably not.
Or at least if they do, they did it in between season 1 and season 2.
Fair.
We do.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to kind of see what that season 2 theme song is, if it's any different or if they change it in any way, shape, or form. Again, for money and time reasons, I'm going to venture to say no. Because it's curious. This show did not hit the cartoon syndication number because it had such a low episode count. Cartoon syndication happens unlike comedies or most syndication that we have when it hits 100 episodes. Cartoon syndication happens at 65 episodes.
Oh, wow.
And so this was like 21, so not even close.
Oh, bummer.
Somebody was there, and Jason Bateman was like, you know what? My movie's coming out. Teen Wolf 2.
Time to wrap this up.
And scene.
So, Jason Bateman, I'm going to put a close to this one. Let's just knock it off. Yeah. Any additional thoughts about the theme song, Nina?
Oh, yeah. I guess there's the recycled animation, I guess, from the parts of the episode intermixed with headshots of
Teen Wolf.
sort of Teen Wolf,
Right?
like live action
Yeah.
Teen Wolf. Is that what's happening there?
Yeah, it's interesting. Chris, go ahead.
But no, I was gonna say
No.
I don't know. I wanted the same thing. I was
Okay.
like, flash, Team Wolf face, Taft. And I thought it was like when they did this, maybe they were in a drug-induced kind of cocaine binge.
It was the 80s, Chris.
Right? Right? And it's like, because it's like, so much going on. And if it can be overwhelming. And it made me think of, I'm going to bring this in here, but something called movement pattern analysis, part of my world.
Okay.
We have something like we're high decision loaders and low decision loaders and moderates. So if you're a low decision loader and you watch that clip, you miss a lot of the stuff in there, and you might remember pieces of it, speaking to what you just said, where something shows up, right? And it's a callback for you. You're like, oh, God, that's so clever. But if you're a high identifier and you're watching that, which I think you are, Nina, and I am too, it's overwhelming. You're like, it's the equivalent of animated verbal musical vomit that is thrown all over you, and it's because you can't separate it all because you're trying to pick up and remember what that other stuff was and why that was there. So it's kind of like it's crazy. So it's like you take on a lot of decisions at the same time. So
Yeah.
Great. Chris, what was your impression of the theme song?
Well, that. What I just
Well, I mean,
said.
it just any additional thoughts about it?
It's like one of those songs though. Like I found it annoying, on a personal but it would stick in your head after a while. If you watched it enough, you'd be like, Team Wolf, Team Wolf. My vague memory of it. I beyond the fact that I couldn't wait for it to get done so it could get to the cartoon. And I too was like those moments where the Team Wolf face would show up. I don't know if that was like some.
I was like, what? What?
Yeah. Like, wait. What? Is that him? Is that
Jarring.
him? And then, but I, when it was finished, I was happy.
No, it's a lengthy, a little over 60 seconds worth of a theme song. And the wolf face that we keep talking about is almost like a weird mixed media art piece.
Okay.
Because you have the face and the hands that look like somebody that's in makeup.
Right.
But then it looks like it's been kind of like brushed over in a way where it seems kind of almost cartoonish.
Right.
But still human in form. And then if you look at some of the additional components that are on top of the wolf, like the hat, it's cartoonish, but it's like very vibrant pink.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the two shirts, it was like a collared shirt with like an undershirt under it.
Yeah.
They are like cartoon animated and like only partially drawn into place. You know? So there's like a lot of blank space sort of in like the blue and white kind of pattern that they have on the shirt. And it looks like it was not like it was rushed. It looks very intentional. And so it looks interesting. But at the same time, like you've got like a hand and a face from Teen Wolf that look like there's a lot of time put and focused on it. Like big eyes, like accentuated nose, like big mouth that's kind of like smiling and talking, like, with some of the words that are going on for the actual song itself, but it seems like it's kind of more just like kind of like moving its mouth and kind of like it's gesturing in a way that you're just like, is he singing along or is he not singing? Like, I'm kind of unsure about what's going on here, but it's highly unusual to see something like this. It's kind of fun, but it's a little bit off-putting. And like you said, for somebody who's paying attention to a lot of different things, like you're never going to see this anywhere else in the episode. This is like dedicated animation for this.
Especially because when the show starts, it's so much slower than the
Oh
song.
God, yeah.
The song comes in so hot and like so fast, and then it's like brrr, and then it's like.
Well, it's weird because the majority of the song, the instruments, they have like an organ, they have drums, and they have a guitar. And sort of the organ is sort of that like kind of like spooky kind of like tone to kind of like pull you in. But it's weird. I had to write down everything that was a part of this because there are multiple components. You have a woman's voice at the very beginning that says, "Beware, Scott, when the moon is full."
That's right.
And you're like, and that's when the organ music's like really kind of hitting Phantom of the opera style, like hot and heavy,
It's
like
Three Dog Night.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting to see that, and then you have all these lines of dialogue that are like Scott. He's like, "Oh no, not again!" And like he keeps flipping out, and then you have spoken word in the background from the guy who's about to sing the theme song, and he goes, "It's a hairy situation," and you're like, "Where the fuck is this going?"
Yeah, where'd Wolfman Jack come in?
But like you keep getting like these things where it says like "Hey man, say don't shy if it happens to you," and you're like, okay, what the fuck did that mean? Like some of the lyrics, because I had to write everything down because I had to parse everything out. The only thing that I thought was relevant or really super interesting or actually impactful for the entire theme song was the sung line that says, "It's fun being different if you have a healthy attitude."
Right. I remember that line.
And I was like,
It stands out.
oh yeah,
amongst the mix of madness.
it really does. And so like it's a nice line. It kind of does an interesting job to set the tone. If again it was for the movie.
Right.
Right.
Oh, right. Good point.
Because in the show he's just like, no, you should be ashamed of like who you are and your family. And in the in the movie he's just kind of like he's coming to accept it, but it's a weird contrast. And so to kind of see those moments, it's interesting. And so there's so much that's on there, just in terms of like what they're saying, and almost all of the dialogue that's put in there that then is referenced in the actual episode is almost all from the first episode.
Right.
Like
I noticed that.
even the sister at the end just saying like, "Looking sharp, Scott." Just like, was that necessary? As everybody howls in the background and the theme song cuts out, you're like, oh, all right, that was a lot.
Oh, we survived that.
Yeah, how do we? Trust me, I've seen worse. This on the scale of like bad theme songs to good theme songs, this sits like pretty squarely in the middle.
Wow.
I wonder why you think cartoons would spend a lot of time on the beginning part, or is it the afterthought because you're so busy trying to get your piece out?
I think that's one of those things that we were saying, like fly on the room in the creative decision process, because there are a lot of people who are, you can really make the argument a lot saying that, a theme song can set the tone. And in a lot of cases, these cartoons almost immediately jump into the theme song. And so it's helpful to kind of give maybe a visual or even like a spoken or like a title credit to kind of introduce the cast and explain some of those people who are there. And really in this, we kind of only get Scott and Grandpa. Like Grandpa coming through the window, which we see almost immediately in the beginning of the episode, because he's like, "Hey, Grandpa," and then that's like it. And I think those are the only two people that they actually introduce. Everybody else that's in there is just kind of implied.
Yeah.
So like theme songs can do a great job in terms of setting up the tone, identifying who the villains or the enemies are.
Right.
Really kind of introducing if you have like a large cast of characters that are involved. And to your point, like you said, this could be a real earworm if you heard it like a couple times. I don't know, though, for us, how many times we're going to be like, you know what, I'm going to listen to that 60 seconds of a Teen Wolf to really kind of get in the mood for the day and sort of like beast it out.
You made me think of when the grandfather comes through the window. I don't know who that is.
Yeah,
and
right.
it's unclear to me.
Right.
When he's going in, he's super hairy.
Mhm.
When he comes out, he just looks like somebody who, in the elven, one of the elven folk that are in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and it's hard when you don't introduce those characters. You kind of enter into an episode, and you're like, who are these people? Like, what's the relationship? Why do they care about each other? It's basic stuff in terms of like normal storytelling that you hope to kind of get out of the way very early and very quickly so that you can jump into a lot of other fun stuff, but in this case they don't. So they just kind of
But it's fun to be different if you have a healthy attitude.
there you go.
Right. Yeah.
This is the movie.
And it's funny because that line seems so different than yes, to the movie, but in the cartoon as you're watching it and you're listening to it, it's like that line stands out a little bit. Weirdly.
Especially when juxtaposed with the like, oh no, not again. Oh no.
Because he had so many. At one point he just goes, "A werewolf family." Like it's.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, exactly. At some point, I wonder to myself, how did they manage to keep this a secret from Scott for so long? Is he kind of what you said? Like, is he somebody not really paying attention, Chris, like that much? Like, were they always werewolves around him? And he was like, "Yeah, I just got a lot of kid stuff to do."
Right.
In
one of the movie clips I was watching, it talks about like where he's having that episode for the first time. He's in the bathroom and he's going through the process of transformation, and his dad is like, open the door, and he opens it, and he's already a werewolf.
Right.
So it's like it's not that bad. Yes, it is. Right. So, but they immediately are talking about it out in open. So that, makes sense there. So, but like in this scenario, it's like, wait a minute, like keeping it hush. What?
Yeah.
The transformation of that.
It's interesting. But speaking of interesting, we also have the animation style for this show and this cartoon just in general. And so, Nina, what were your thoughts on sort of the animation style, either regarding the characters, the background, the environment? What was there anything that this made you think of?
So I don't have a lot of familiarity with morning cartoons.
This is your first Saturday morning cartoon that you've ever watched, right?
This is correct, and this is actually correct, and I can tell you why. I was telling Chris earlier, because when I was a kid growing up, I wasn't home on Saturday mornings to watch Saturday morning cartoons. I was in Chinese school on Saturday mornings, learning how to speak. I was sitting in class from 9 to 1 on Saturdays and was so jealous of my friends watching Saturday morning cartoons when instead I was in a classroom taking lessons
on how to speak and
on
write.
how to speak, write, and read Chinese.
Oh my God. I'm very sorry. Well, we are ecstatic that you could be here.
I don't take those classes now.
Guess what I just found out? That you can refamiliarize yourself with 218, almost 220 different cartoons Next to this guy sitting right over.
Oh my God, you're the worst, Chris. You're the worst hype man in the world. And so anything that you noticed specifically, Nina, about the animation style, anything at all?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I thought was interesting, and maybe it merges a little bit with plot, was what they chose to animate to advance plot. And I guess what I'm thinking of is like the parts of Scott's body that they would show transforming to indicate that he was changing from human to werewolf or werewolf if you're
Same.
Chris, where it would be like, oh, first you show the ears getting pointy, then you show the mouth becoming fangs. Then they do the shot of like him looking up at his hair as it expands out, and then the hair growing on his hand.
Right.
And I think that exact sequence happened twice in the episode because he changed at least 2 times.
Right.
But both times it was that exact sequence of like ears, then fangs, then looking up at the hair on the head, and then the hair on the hands.
Right. It's interesting to kind of see what that transformation is cartoon wise.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in an area where like they don't have to worry about special effects that you would worry about in a movie. They can do anything that they want. I mean, it's and I'll kind of talk about this as we go around the horn, but it's baffling to see, like, you know, that they really mute a lot of the Teen Wolf transformation. I mean, when he is in the movie, he looks sort of like a Sasquatch, like a ginger Sasquatch.
Yeah. Adam is a young Chewbacca.
Yeah. You know, and in this, they're just like, oh, he's got hair on his palms. Like, okay, buddy. Like,
by those standards, I am a werewolf. No, not on my paws.
No. Anything else, Nina?
No, that stood out most to me.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Chris, impressions about the animation?
Same. With but we would watch his hands, and that was like the key thing. You know, it's kind of like when Hulk turns green.
Yeah.
You know, but and then the cartoon itself made me think of like Scooby Doo. You know, like
Yes.
that era,
Right.
and those colors that were used.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of brights. Like I can't remember, the cars like a deep red that stuck with me, and so I found the colors appealing in it actually. You know, I enjoyed that element of it. So it was visually, I didn't mind it. I enjoyed it.
For me, I will say that you're correct. I had a lot of because this was done by Hanna-Barbera Australia.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know that.
There was a lot of Hanna-Barbera influence that it had, as well as also I saw a lot of Ruby Spears, which was a cartoon production company that did a lot of cartoons during the late 70s, early 80s, and so a lot of the simplicity of the character design, you know, a couple bright colors, you know, that they had, like primary bright colors, mixed with very little shading.
Right.
Very little
None.
shading
Yeah,
for the actual
right.
characters themselves, which is like kind of classic Scooby-Doo, you know? And the weirdest thing is and this is a callback from 219 episodes ago when we first did our first episode with a cartoon called Turbo Teen that surprisingly enough is a contemporary because it came out in 1984 and 1985. And so Teen Wolf would have come out the next year. There is a character that is in Turbo Teen. His name is Brett Matthews, who almost looks like Scott, like down to the haircut. And if you made the Brett character in Turbo Teen a little bit taller and put a Letterman's jacket on it, it's Scott.
Oh, interesting.
wow.
It's almost Scott. Like
Huh.
it's creepy to see it. Turbo Teen is where a kid turns into a car based on whether or not he gets exposed to hot or cold temperatures.
I bizarrely think I remember that.
Yeah. It's and so that's like kind of like we're talking about sort of like the secret nature and like the shame behind sort of these body transformations, or in the case of Turbo Teen, body horror, because like his arm becomes a tire and like his body just like morphs into this disgusting car. What I don't want to say the car is disgusting, but the process of him like moving and shaping his body is truly kind of Cronenberg.
Oh.
Like it's weird to watch, you know. But
one other thought is like, based on what you said, that's interesting to hear, because when I watched the animation of this, it felt really familiar to me.
yeah,
You know, and now that I know why from your description, it's like, oh, so it felt very comfortable to watch.
and again, too, a lot of like Scooby-Doo. the character animation was very simple, but then if you look at some of the detailed background and environment that they have, it is very intricate. There's a lot of stuff. At some point when they show sort of the town and they kind of pan over like the werewolf kind of history that the town has and sort of the economy they built off of the fact that they have werewolf sightings, it's like really detailed. It's very intricate. And it's very funny too, because to Nina's point, when you were just like, it's interesting to see what they animate. It was interesting for me to see what they didn't animate. There were a lot of times like there's a scene where we have like two people in a car and they're driving across town, and it's shot from a wide view, and you just see the car on like a 2D plane just kind of like moving across, but it's far enough away that a conversation's happening, but they're not even animating the mouth. Like you see one character, but two are in there because the previous shot had established that, but they are not animating that mouth at all. It's barely the tires moving around and around as they just kind of like pull them across. Like it almost looks rotoscoped, and you're like, ooh, this looks real lazy, guys. It's like Hanna-Barbera Australia was like, we're going to do this, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on it.
Well, okay, so if we're talking about other sequences that felt a little bit lazy.
Yeah, get into this wonky nature of this animation.
Yeah, so one that came to mind was the part late in the episode where Scott is in front of the movie screen.
Yeah.
And he's like on his way after he's like, I think there's been like the switcheroo with the reporter, and he's now he's on the hunt for Styles.
Right.
Right. And so you see his silhouette, and then you see the giant movie screen that's playing one of the 4 featured werewolf movies. And pretty much that sequence is like him in the shadow, and I think there's him with dialogue, but what's on the screen is basically a werewolf close up going like this over and
towards
over.
him.
Towards him.
Right.
Like over and over again. It's like, I can't imagine that some people would drive to a drive-in to watch a werewolf themed movie where like that was a good 30 seconds of the film.
I would.
And Chris has.
Skyline
it's interesting because it was almost like in modern times, it was almost like somebody had just played a GIF of a werewolf.
Yes.
Just going back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
back and forth. And, and it's to like set up that couple seconds of him just being like, oh, I guess I do look like my Uncle Seymour. Which,
that's
again,
right.
he is not in full werewolf transformation, and then very jankily animates him jumping over a fence and like out of the area where they actually have this, where they have the drive-in.
Right.
So it's very silly to kind of see some of that. To Chris's point, like it's accessible and it's a little bit familiar if you're familiar with some of those older Ruby Spears Hanna-Barbera cartoons. But if this is something that you're looking at for like the first time in like by modern day standards, you're like, ooh, they are cutting some corners here, which is fine. It's fine to be able to do some of that, and it's interesting. Far too often you kind of think, are they doing this because they want to really concentrate and focus on story and plot? And then when you watch the cartoon, you're like, oh no. They weren't doing really either of those. So fair enough.
Yeah.
I want to kind of get into some of the characters. We sort of talked about the fact in the introduction that we didn't have a kind of a good roll call of some of these characters that were here. Again, we have Scott as sort of our lead werewolf that we have that's available. We obviously have, he has a mother and a father. He has a younger sister. He has a grandmother and a grandfather that live with them. This comprises this sort of werewolf family that they have. Then we have some supporting characters that are in here. And it's good because it's sort of limited in scope, because I think if you had made this like, if you had given us a cavalcade of different characters as a part of this high school, I would have just kind of thrown in the towel and said, I don't care about any of these people. But we have Boof, who is his like female friend. I want to say also love interest as well.
Although he doesn't know that.
Yeah, she's in love with him. That classic story, right?
Yeah. We have Styles, who is, which they don't really introduce him at all in the beginning. You only know that his name is Styles because if you're familiar with the movie, and because during the actual like introduction when he's like, there's only 2 people who know my story, Boof and Styles. And they kind of cut to both of them in animation that, again, you see in the theme song recycled into the episode. So we have him as like gray shirt and khakis guy. And then we have Pamela Wells, and she is dating an awful, terrible, toxic male named Mick. And so From all these characters, I wanted to ask, did you have a favorite that we kind of got into, or that you had a chance to kind of experience tonight? Did you have a favorite character from this weird hodgepodge of people?
For me, it's probably Boof.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, just like somebody who is like the good friend, the girl next door, the one who was like there, for Scott. I had some negative feelings about some of the other ones.
I had a lot of negative feelings about some of these characters. No, okay, good. We got one in the counter for Boof. Chris, anybody for you?
The grandpa, or who's the dude that comes in the window and
The grandfather? The grandpa?
I just got a kick out of his physicality when I was watching elements of it and the way he talks. Boof was the character that I was most connected to in terms of like the gem, the hidden gem that no one sees is the gem, right? I mean, who's got like who's real the story? I think we want to hear more about, and then just watching Styles and like he's supposedly the best friend, and I guess we'll get into this more, but he's the lengths he will go to make a buck.
Yeah.
His whole buck philosophy is really interesting, and it's like if you're a young entrepreneur, you're like, Styles is out there trying to make $1, change his life for the better. Meanwhile, he's screwing people over in the process. 1980s, hello.
Well, I think we're getting into it now. Just in terms of the plot. We had this whole setup where in the theme song, Scott explicitly says like, I have two people who I've trusted with my shame secret of turning into a werewolf. It is Boof and it is Styles. And we find out very quickly when we're introduced to Styles, there's some challenges in terms of the relationship. And so I kind of almost want to talk about the plot from the perspective. We're not going to go for a beat-by-beat breakdown, but I want to pose the question to both of you. For somebody who is a confidant who has such an important secret, is Styles a good friend?
No.
Can I swear on this?
No.
Yeah, of course you can swear.
He's a fucking scumbag.
Right? Like if you have two friends that you've trusted with your secret, you wouldn't expect one of them to be like, ooh, I know how to make a quick buck. I'm going to take Scott's family album and sell it to the reporter.
Yeah, it's like let me out you. Like who am I
Exactly.
working for here?
Especially if the whole premise is that in under this version of the show, Scott's is ashamed or anxious about his secret.
Yeah, right.
A best friend would not out him.
I mean, maybe it's a tool they use to elevate the stakes, right? So they don't have anybody else to carry that out, so they put it on Styles, the character.
I mean, I think it's challenging because like you do have Mick is really kind of the villain,
Oh yeah.
And then to a further extent, I'll say that Scott kind of sees society and the rest of Wolverton as sort of the enemy as well,
Right.
As again trying to kind of out him, and for
commercial purposes.
Yeah, for commercial purposes, and I think for a story that is kind of really trying to very strongly hit the note about being different and being able to accept that you're different. And again, kind of juxtaposing that in the theme song with what we actually see in the episode, it doesn't seem to make sense for me. Like there seems to be a lot of problems in terms of how, Scott, one, shares the story, and then how his friend Styles just seems to be ready and willing to fuck him over to make $100.
I'm trying to think of like what's a equivalent of that. Some show or TV show where that is the friends kind of does that. You know what I'm talking about? Like that character. Where do we see that elsewhere?
I mean, I think that's kind of like a standard trope of
Right.
like best friend who's also a dick,
Right.
And it's terrible to kind of see that in this cartoon because one, I think they want you to like Styles. Like, I think they want you to like
Kinda,
him
right?
as a character.
He has moments.
As a friend, and as they set it up, like, they meet in the morning, like they're getting ready to go to school, which is fun because they never make it to school.
Good point.
But like there's a ton of stuff that's like going on, and Styles is there for him. But Styles is there for him because it seems like it might be financially
Self-agenda.
convenient
Right.
to like fuck him over in the
Right.
end.
A couple thoughts on Scott.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine like he's our main character yet. What I liked about the way they what they did with him is like, yeah, he had this secret, but he wasn't like like an idiot. You know what I mean? But like he the way he carried himself. I mean, if I could jump on the body language train wagon
Oh, let's do
for,
it,
for a
buddy.
second. He sits down at one point. He's popping the elbow pop, which you were doing, putting your elbow up to make yourself appear larger than you are, like to take up space and ground you, right? It's a technique that we do. But he's talking to, is it Pamela, one of his love interests
Yeah,
at one
yeah,
point?
the
He
woman.
puts his arm up, popping the elbow. He's like, hey. So, and he, he could have come across really creepy, and I think he's on the edge. But he's trying to get his yearbook back, but at this or his family photo album back. But it was interesting. He's open in his body language. He's like, he's not like weak in character. He's not. It's a backbone to him. His character, like there's a sturdiness that you don't that somebody. And then, but he's carrying this secret with him everywhere he goes. So like, if you're watching that and you have your own secrets, I think it resonates. You might like two lives. You're this guy. You're trying to get along, in your world, and yet you carry this secret. And how many times do you hear it, like somebody saying, they're living the life, but they've always carried this secret with them, right? So I think they
Right.
did a nice job of kind of setting that up for us. That
Yeah.
here's a guy of contrasts, seems to have it together, comfortable talking to women, at that age,
He seems to be confident.
confident. He's like everybody. Oh, my family, but then on top of it, now he's got this like my family and this secret, and I have to deal with this. And I got two people, and one of the two people I mentioned could screw me over at any moment. How stressful that must be.
That would be cripplingly stressful for me to have to deal with. That just seems like it's almost too much,
Right.
to have a friend that you're like, I'm gonna hang out with you all the time, and you're like my confidant for all this stuff, but like, don't fuck me over. Oh, he's fucking me over.
Yeah, and Mick, who plays like that's the bully, right?
Yeah.
The boyfriend.
Correct.
And he's like almost societally to me,
Oh
like
God, he's terrible.
like that asshole.
Yeah.
That element, that energy that we see so much today. So it's like so troubling. So not only is he got the secret he's carrying, he's got to deal with Mick, who just represents that kind of closed-minded, this way, and this is know your place kind of order, which we're seeing a lot
What
today.
are you doing talking to my girl?
Right. She's an independent woman. She can talk to whoever she wants, but not back then. Everything's my girl. Get over Mike, like she's a piece of property.
Oh yeah, yeah. Can we talk about the juxtaposition of Pamela versus Buff?
Yeah, let's do this.
Okay, all right. I got some thoughts on this.
Please.
Right. So we have Pamela, who is the person that Scott is romantically interested in. She has the long hair. She's drawn to have like a big chest and like the very, very like, very thin waist. She has on the skirt. Also, when we first see her, she's walking a dog, and eventually she like jumps in a car with Mick, and the dog just runs off. Right?
Animal abandonment.
Yeah, her dog named Daisy. That
Daisy
she has.
Yeah.
Who's huge.
Right. And
love Scott.
and for being an independent woman, she's like, oh, Mick's gonna kill you if he sees that you're talking to me. Very high pitched voice. And then you have Buff, right? Your girl next door, animated and much stockier, right? Like short hair, bangs, and she's the one who's there for Scott all the time.
Right.
The juxtaposition I found was striking.
And I think it's interesting too because the whole posit that we have for this is the central idea that this family photo album that the grandmother shares at the breakfast table, it has all of Scott's family lineage, and again, like all the photos are really dark because they were taken by torchlight, which
Yeah, was this Dracula?
yeah, were they like stone sketches, or like did somebody do a painting like late at night and they're just like, we're gonna do an entire black wash and then a whole bunch of gradients.
Right.
Like, it's just there's a lot of I mean they're definitely trying, and in some cases they're doing a decent job of injecting a little bit of humor that's in there, to kind of help fully flesh out and realize the fact that like this is a family who does care about each other, and that they have ties, and that this isn't like a one-off instance.
Right.
This is like, this seems like it's been multiple generations. We don't really know how far back, but that there's like generations of these werewolves that are available. And the thing that was really surprising to me was the whole idea that like, it was very surprising to me to kind of see the fact that Scott is worried if this book gets out, which again, he carries the book out of the house. So he kind of shoots himself in the foot within the first like 2 minutes of the show. And then he says, if people find out about my family secret, I'd never get a date. And it's like, do you think that I'm pretty sure you'd be dead given the context of like the society that you've created where this is now a secret and it's a shame for you? Like, I'm pretty sure those people who were taking photos by torchlight would now appear in the like 1985, 1986 with like, again, probably guns and shoot your family for being different.
That's right.
You know, but it's interesting that like his big concern is he's like, I'm never going to get a girlfriend. I'm never going to go on a date. Like, how am I going to be that original party animal?
Well, I wondered what that was, if it's, being forced to carry that weight, yet still as an adolescent or early teen, trying to live the life of a teen, but yet you, unlike other teens who may not experience this kind of thing, you're carrying that burden, so you're coming of age faster. I don't know if that was a message maybe they were trying to play with.
I think that there's a lot of messages, I mean, even to the point that we're talking about Mick, I think that they're in some way, I mean, again, this is the 80s, and I'm not going to make any excuse for their creative decision and the process that they went through for making this, as well as also some of the language and dialogue. But I mean, you can tell that it's very heavily influenced by male writers. For the fact that like we've got Mick with like lines. He says, "Pam's my girl. Stay away if you know what's good for you." And we've talked about the sense that Pam herself says like he'll kill you. Like, he will kill you. Like, he is negligent with my dog. He will murder you. Like I just
Pretty intense.
yeah, it is intense, and like it's weird because it's not just like it's not a one-off where you see it where you're like, maybe there's been a history where Scott has been like flirting with Pam in the past, and it's something that like has made the relationship between Pam and Mick kind of on the rocks. No, it's just everybody seems like they're kind of shitty about everything that's going on, and Pam could just do so much better for herself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, what's that say about Pam's character? Right? It's like,
Or like even the part in the car where Scott is in the car with her, and then he's covered in darkness, and he changes, and his voice deepens.
Yeah,
And she's like, "Oh, Scott, what's happened to your voice? You sound so much more macho."
yeah, big time. Can I the clarification in that moment? I was
Yeah.
confused for a second because does he get in the back seat at a certain point?
Because I think that's where he thinks the photo album is.
But when he comes back up and he's the werewolf and it's not dark, or like
Oh, it is
what-
conveniently not dark there.
right?
Yeah.
I should have a bell to your listeners every time I say werewolf.
Ding.
it's a bell that's in my heart, buddy.
Werewolf. Is it werewolf?
Werewolf.
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 Oh, wolf. Okay. Okay. But does she see him
Yeah, I mean,
as the werewolf?
yeah, at some point towards the very end, because he
Yes.
says like I feel like an animal, but he's doing it in a way where his voice is like, "When I'm around you, I feel like an animal."
Right.
To which then she makes the response that Nina had commented on. She's like, "What's up with your voice? You sound so show."
Well, in the following episodes, is it like the movie in the sense that all of a sudden after seeing now he's starting to come out slowly to people, so it becomes more and more accepted, and by the end of the series, is he out there?
I actually don't know. I mean, we've, the challenge with all of this is that, obviously for anybody who's listening who is a fan of Teen Wolf, the animated series, if you guys are listening, we are making a very clear snap judgment based on
here.
that first episode.
Correct.
That small
Right.
nugget that we have from the 2 seasons of this show, with episode 1 being Teen Wolf's family secret. And so, as an idea for what happens for the rest of the series, I mean, it's kind of it'll be up to listeners right now to kind of make the distinction of whether or not they kind of want to delve further into Teen Wolf, or if our recommendations are going to persuade or dissuade them later on in the episode.
Side note, I mean, one of the other characters that, so there's the grandmother, right? And the grandmother very clearly has a Transylvanian accent,
Yes, very very
right?
thick.
And so it seems like the implication is that essentially the family has at some point immigrated, or at least the grandmother immigrated from somewhere else into Wolverton. And so if we're talking about themes of acceptance and trying to fit in, like that's another opportunity that the show could have had to talk about how do you deal with feelings of being an outsider, where again the message of like hide it
Yeah.
is a different creative choice.
I think it's always weird, because at that point, and maybe this is just because I have recently binged on the Netflix series, all of season 2 for the Netflix series Big Mouth, which just recently came out with Nick Kroll, John Mulaney, an extremely talented voice cast of everybody who's in there, but they talk heavily about childhood shame in this cartoon. And so, it's interesting to kind of see the fact that in that show, they're doing a great job of defining it, explaining everybody's individual shame and what people are sensitive about and what you can be vulnerable about, but then also coming to a point that is healthy where you can accept those differences. Like you can figure these things out, and you can work with what's comfortable for you in that moment. You can change at any point in time, you can make a new decision. But it's interesting to see that like for this, it's like very heavily shame based. And like the motivating factor for his shame is like whether or not he's going to like get a girl. And
as
to like,
that as success, right? For somebody that age.
yeah. And that's hard. It's like, I'm assuming that, and I can't speak for everybody, but anybody who is in that like awkward middle school and high school era where you're a horny teen and you're trying to have conversations with the opposite sex, and or same sex, you're trying to have a conversation with somebody that you find attractive, that you're interested in, that you'd like to be more than just platonic friends with, and that's hard, that's always a hard thing. But like, is that really, and I guess this is a great question, is like, is that a measure of success? And like, why do we keep indicating that as a level of success? Why do we keep kind of pegging this for the fact that like we have Pam, who presumably is a cheerleader, and so she's at a specific social status or hierarchy within that high school.
Yeah, the popular girls.
Yeah, so we have her that's there, and she's obviously dating this jock again, has a specific status, that's aligned. And like, we keep taking these tropes of sort of where we are and these people and measuring and defining it against that level of success. And I just, in some point, I don't feel it's healthy. I mean, maybe I did when I was a kid, but a new decision right now, like, it just doesn't feel like it's a complete idea.
Well, it makes me think two things. One is the era, the time, right? I mean, Breakfast Club comes out a few years before the show.
Right.
And it's very much kind of similar. You're making me think this. The shame-based stuff is really interesting. And maybe I don't know this. I would love to be that fly, to ask the following question to the writers in the room. Was this, this is what kids are dealing with at this point, so we're writing it through that frame, not making the judgment of, hey, basing your success on financial or your ability to get the girls or, the male mentality. And I don't know.
No. And I think it's even further complicated by the fact that later in this episode, we have this moment where Styles is trying to make a quick buck.
Oh God!
Oh God!
Which time?
Yeah. Well, so I had to write this down because this is just so funny. So we have, and this is going to be an old sounding sentence that I say right now. We have Styles on a payphone phone with a newspaper reporter, a local newspaper reporter, and he's having a conversation. He goes, "What would you pay for a picture of a real werewolf?" And there's like a pause, and the animation kind of almost like pauses, and then it kicks back in when he's like, "All right, I like those high numbers," and which we again come to realize that like it's $100.
It's $100.
It's $100. Like he would throw he would out his friend for $100
on the actual dollar bill that he pulls back. That's maybe a different moment where is that $100 bill?
No, it's $1.
It's a $1.
Yeah,
bill.
so that's where he
would sell them up for $1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we go through this whole process of learning that this is the amount, and so the whole thing kind of comes to this conclusion at this drive-in where Styles is trying to do a switcheroo with Mick's or Pamela's has now obtained a copy of the family photo album, and her and Scott have switched, and so he has like a copy of her yearbook. She has a copy of the family photo album. Styles is trying to intervene as kind of a middleman to kind of go through this process, but he's also selling werewolf clothing outside of this drive-in.
Dressed as a werewolf.
Dressed as a werewolf. But at some point, he just goes, "We have everything you need to be ugly." And I was like,
Oh.
what fucking hurtful language
Wow.
is in this?
Yeah.
I was like, one, you're dressed up in actually fuller werewolf gear than your friend who continues to puberty transform into a quote unquote werewolf. But then you have the nerve and the gall to just be like, my buddy's ugly, dress like my ugly friend. And it's like, it feels so insulting through and through. I don't know. There was a part where I was ashamed, kind of like watching the show. I was like, oof, boy, what did I get into? Because again, for me, like my nostalgic anchor is the movie, both of the movies. And I love both of those movies. They're fun. They're like fantasy coming of age, movies. They're not supposed to be taken seriously. And I feel like this kept trying to put a serious note or thread through the entire story, and I was like, I don't know that works. I just don't know that it works within the context of this show.
I mean, maybe there's the possibility that over the course of the 2 seasons, in order to get to a place of acceptance where Scott is okay and has a healthy attitude about his situation, they had to start from a place of like, it's all terrible.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
No.
Maybe.
I could see that if that's what they're gonna set up, and the trajectory that this show is gonna go in. I think that would be an interesting journey. Of kind of the whole town just being like, you know what, we got a werewolf family among our mix, and then at that point, I just feel like it's sort of like that True Blood thing. Where after the first season, you're like, and we also got vampires, and we got weird wood elves, and there's
Banshees.
orgies. There's orgies in the fucking park, and you're like, and everything's just a weird monster.
Right.
Look
Right.
how far we've come.
Look how far we've come. Look how progressive Wolverton is as a society.
Mhm.
That would be. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
I'd be okay with that. But I'm gonna venture to say that again for time and money.
Yeah, probably, right? They weren't thinking about these larger issues. Or maybe they were. And also, like, putting ourselves, obviously today when we watch it, we have a very different read. You and I were talking this on the way out, like putting ourselves back in those shoes back in the 1980s and watching this. Would it be, would these things be glaring to us?
It's always fun to kind of see these snippets of time in terms of societally what people were writing to, what their concerns were, what they identified as being potentially important for in a child's cartoon to kind of highlight and spearhead, and what issues they were dealing with, And so watching this cartoon, I would have been probably 6 or 7 years old, and so I guarantee this would have gone right over my head. I would have been like, he's a werewolf, cool.
Right.
That would have been it, And and that's the part is that, we get a chance now to kind of watch this as adults with a more critical lens. And and the challenging thing is that for like the toxic male masculinity that we have in this, and given the current climate that we have within our country, it's
timely.
All the more glaring.
Yeah. It's really kind of weird to watch. It's hard to watch in some cases. So, yikes. Any final thoughts or questions about the plot of Teen Wolf that we need to get answered? I feel like Chris is looking up the word werewolf to be like, am I saying this wrong?
Yeah.
There's an L and an F at the end of it.
All right. Well, listen. While we're coming out about secrets, I come from a family of werewolves, so there's a sub-tribe, the werewolves, and the difference of the two. So this show for me spoke to my family's deeper read on this. That's why I say werewolf, because my people are werewolves.
Well, You know what? I apologize, and I feel like a real piece of shit then for giving you crap about it for the last hour.
It's okay. It's cool. I'm just
Good.
glad to
We're-
come clear and not have Styles, either of you be Styles and
Yeah,
sell me
no.
out to the Washington Post.
I was just gonna say we're glad to have you among us.
Oh.
Did you just howl? Did you just give a little time?
That's what werewolves do. We
Did
go,
you just
"Ow."
go howl?
It's like we're saying cool with that. We just say, ow.
Perfect. Well, we obviously have opinions, and we are going to have an opportunity to say whether or not, in a moment, we recommend or don't recommend this cartoon. But hey, guess what? You listening right now, yeah, you have opinions about these shows. And so we have scoured IMDb to find a couple of your opinions. We are now going to turn it over to longtime friend of the show, Bobby Anthem, for this week's Love It or Hate It. Bobby, take it away.
This week's Love It is titled Teen Wolf Cartoon Equals Mankind's Finest Hour. The half hour, actually. By 8Ball420 in March 2001. This guy says, I guess I'm the only one who remembers this show, or watched it for that matter, but Teen Wolf the cartoon was an 80s classic. In fact, if I had to define the 80s with one form of media, film, television, music, I would have to say Teen Wolf the cartoon. I think in the years to come, this show will be heralded as an important step in not only Saturday morning television, but for mankind as well. And our Hate It is titled From a Bad Movie to a Boring Cartoon by Joseph P. Ulibus in July 2004. Joseph wrote, Teen Wolf 1986 was a Saturday morning cartoon based upon the movie Teen Wolf. Like the movie, the cartoon was pretty bad and very unnoteworthy. A lot of cartoons that are based on movies came out during this time period. To this day, I haven't found one that was slightly entertaining. The cartoon featured a cheesy Teen Wolf logo whenever some action occurred. I couldn't take the animated series any more than I could bear watching the original movie or its lame sequel. Why don't these animation creators get some imagination or make another retread of a classic cartoon character? What is the purpose of remaking a bad movie into a television animated series? They'll never learn. Please avoid. It's not worth watching.
Perfect as always, Bobby. I do not agree with that last Hate It, saying that it was a bad movie. I think in no way, shape, or form it was a bad movie. I think Teen Wolf is one of those great quintessential 80s films that is fun and still has a lot of humor and some heart in it. So we are now at the point where we are going to do our recommendations. And so we are going to get a chance to go around the horn and say whether you recommend the Teen Wolf or whether you do not recommend Teen Wolf to our listeners. And again, if you do not recommend Teen Wolf, you can go one extra step and you can give it the dip. And if you give it the Roger Rabbit style dip, it erases it from the annals of cartoon history forever, just within the context of the show. So Nina, we're going to start with you as our guest. Thank you so much for being here. Do you recommend Teen Wolf?
I cannot recommend Teen Wolf. And I would be inclined to give it the Roger Rabbit dip, but I won't, just because I only watched the first episode, and I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt that over the course of the 2 seasons, maybe they start from a very shameful place to work their way to a place of acceptance. But I can't recommend it.
Understood. No. I think that's a good point. Chris.
Well, in the words of Joe Randazzo, who's been on one of these podcasts with you, yeah. I'm with Nina. Wouldn't recommend it as if you're going to invest your time and energy. And maybe I'm not going to give it the dip for the same reason. Maybe they get there. But if you're watching this as an adult and you want to see where our culture has come full circle since the 80s,
Shit.
step right back into this and watch it from that perspective, because it's very fascinating, the ongoing kind of fight, if you're into it as an adult, to watch, culture finding its cyclical path, and with each other cycle, the fight deepens and it goes back and forth culturally. So from that perspective, I found it interesting to watch, to look back on from that time period. That's how I would invest my time if I was going to watch it, based at least the first episode.
Understood. No, thank you, Chris. So we have 2 not recommends, but no dips. We're going to go 3 for 3. I am not going to recommend this as well, but I'm also not going to give it the dip. I'm not going to give it the dip because I love the first and the second Teen Wolf movies a lot. But I'm not going to recommend the show because of what I think they do in terms of the story and a lot of the changes that they apply, as well as also kind of the focus that they have for Scott. They created this really interesting world in the movie where he had that notoriety, he had that popularity. You know, it was something fun that he was coming to accept himself inside. And then I feel almost to sweep the rug out from underneath him and be like, we're going to approach this from a place of shame and from a place of secrecy. I think it kind of does a huge disservice, you know, because as a cartoon, you're given a lot of opportunity to kind of evolve and create new and interesting worlds and characters. And so I have to always think, and Nina and Chris were all improvisers within the DC area, you know, we will perform under the context or with the idea in mind. If this is true, then what else is true? And I feel like this could be a fun opportunity for them to bring in a lot of those other characters, for them to kind of build off of the world in a way that they maybe couldn't do within the actual movie. Because again, the movie itself is only like maybe it's a little over 90 minutes. And it, you know, it's a high school kind of feel good coming of age comedy fantasy, you know, type of a movie. And for the cartoon, it's going to run much longer than the movie itself. You have a lot of opportunity to be able to take those characters, elevate them, move them around, see what some of the fun things could be, you know, where they could continue to be a star. They could continue to kind of accept those things that are different about them and help other people kind of come to that same understanding as well, you know? And so to be able to say or have Teen Wolf just be like, hey, Dracula teen, like there's no reason you should feel bad about, you know, the fact that you can only come out at night and you've got fangs. Like, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity to have very clear messaging about acceptance mapped into a monster society for children in the 80s. And I kind of feel like this was sort of a failure to be able to do that. And so it's kind of a bummer to see that. But sort of, it's also very interesting at the same time to see that they were like, you know what? We're going to change and flip the script on this, but we're going to retain a lot of the same characters that we had from the movie itself. And so for me, it's kind of fun to see some of those characters, but it's not as strong as a connection to say that I would recommend this to somebody else to watch.
Amen.
So there we go.
Bummer.
That's Teen Wolf. And this is the final episode that we have in October for Spooky Cartoon Month. We loved it with a cartoon that's not really spooky at all. It's more just kind of like putting your head in your hand and just going, oh, I could go for a comforting bowl of soup.
Chicken soup made by your grandmother.
Exactly.
Who may or may not be a werewolf.
From Transylvania.
Scott, come in. Try the soup. Just came out. I don't know who lives in here.
Perfect, Chris. We're now at the point where I want to thank Nina, Chris. Thank you both so much for coming on and talking Teen Wolf with me today. This was a real joy. I'm glad that you were able to come over and hang out and do this.
Likewise. Thank you.
Yeah, it's wonderful you do this and
Absolutely.
that you called us to do it.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
You're very
We're grateful to hang with you around the table of wisdom here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to just check and see if anybody listening would like to find you, where could they find you social media wise? And if there's anything that you have coming up that you would like to let listeners know that they should come and check out.
Sure. So my Instagram is nina.hsu and then the number 1. I don't post a lot. I post pictures of places I visit, but that's fun. As far as being an improviser, I perform with the Wit Ensemble Knox at Washington Improv Theater with these two guys. We have shows coming up. I also perform with a couple other groups, Double Date, The Hypothesis.
Who do you do Double Date with?
Also with Chris Ulrich.
Chris Ulrich and Jane White.
Oh, great. Wow. That's cool.
They're great.
All right. Thank you so much, Nina. Chris, where can the good folks find you online? Anything that you would like to plug, sir?
Yeah, come check out my website, www.seeyouinthemoment.com. It's my body language website, and it's where I live and spend most of my time doing keynotes, talks, coach one-on-one with folks that want to come across and be powerful and confident in their world and be okay with that. So if the Scots out there, if I can help you, let me know. And also I get to perform with these guys as well with Knox, and I perform with Double Date, and I perform with Jive Turkey, which I do with myself and one other guy, Joe Rendezzo.
Hi, Joe.
Hey, Joe. And oh yeah, my Twitter is its_ChrisU. Exclamation point, I think.
And we'll have all this information actually up in the show notes too.
Great.
So see you in the moment. We'll put that up there because it is the letter C and then the letter U.
Oh, yes.
In the moment for Chris Ulrich.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. You heard him on this week's show. Bobby Anthem. You can hear his paranormal podcast, Inhuman Experience. You can find them on Twitter at IEXP_podcast. And you can find their show on Spreaker and SoundCloud. He's also the occasional third co-host on the THT Movie Podcast Review, which broadcasts every Saturday night at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard on Mixlr. And you can find him on Twitter at Bobby Anthem. Send him a message, show him some love. He is simply the best. We're actually very close to getting Bobby Anthem animated, which has been our campaign for 2018, so we are very excited to get Bobby Anthem animated. As for me, as these two jokers mentioned, we perform live improv comedy in DC with a group that's called Knox. That's NOX exclamation point. We perform with Washington Improv Theater. You can find tickets and times witdc.org. We have a free show that is coming up on October 30th, which is a show that we do in the dark for Halloween. So that should be exciting, and you can find that all witdc.org. If you're looking for Dave, you can find him on Twitter at DrClawMD. You can find all of his writings, nerdist.com, collider.com, and davetrumbore.com. Want to support us? Tell a friend and review us on iTunes. Boring, I know, but it actually really, really helps the show. Chat with us on Twitter at MorningToons. Remember, that's morning with the U. You can check us out on Instagram and Facebook at Saturday Morning Cartoons, or email us, SaturdayMorningCartoons@gmail.com. You can find all of these links in our social media bios using our link tree. It has a full list of all the cartoons that we watch, plus you can recommend a cartoon for us to watch. Those recommendations get priority. If you want to listen to us, you can listen to us on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back on November 5th with Netflix November and two of my favorite shows that we're going to be discussing that month. So I feel like we need to almost like howl this out.
Like a werewolf?
So, yeah, like a
werewolf?
Like a werewolf. So if we were to do that, we would just be kind of like, woof.
Actually, it's wah, wah, wolf.
Okay, so we'll just do that.
You want to?
All right, yeah, here we go.
can do anything.
1,
Wah.
2, 3.
Wah,
wah,
wolf.
Perfect. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, everybody. Thanks a lot for listening to Saturday Morning Cartoons. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to transform and roll out.